Grander earth has quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice, and seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken for my regard. Through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. Through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. The waves and wind still know His name. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me.
Sing up from the ashes. And up from the ashes, your love has brought us out of the darkness and into the light, lifting our sorrows, bearing our burdens, healing our hearts. To our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, singing hallelujah. To our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, singing hallelujah. Chains have been broken, eyes have been opened. An army of dry bones is starting to rise, 'cause death is defeated and we are victorious, for you are alive. And to our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, we're singing hallelujah. To our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, we're singing hallelujah. We're singing hallelujah, singing hallelujah. We're 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 singing hallelujah. For you are glorious. For you are glorious. For you are glorious. For you are to our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, we're singing hallelujah. To our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice. Sing it again. And to our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice, we're singing hallelujah. To our God we lift up one voice. To our God we lift up one song. To our God we lift up one voice. We're singing hallelujah. We're singing hallelujah. Sing, you are glorious. For you are glorious. Amen. You may be seated.
We thought it might be fun to see what it would look like if a bunch of science nerds did some praise and worship. So here's your worship team. Okay. Yeah. Can you just get on? That's what I like to call left brain praise and worship. Can I have the first slide, please? It's our scripture verse for today. Not only so, but we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Next slide, please. I'm going to go ahead and read from notes. I apologize for that. If you'd like to hear me speak extemporaneously, I welcome you to my chemistry classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7:45 a.m. Why am I here? And what is my purpose? What's God's calling on my life? The significance of these questions is encapsulated in this quote by Mark Twain. Next slide, please. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. What does God's call on someone's life look like? When I was your age, I wasn't sure what God's call on my life was. In some cases, I think I limited his call on my life because I thought I had to see the heavens open and God paint out his call for me in majestic letters in the sky. I also thought that God's call would always involve something like missionary or pastoral work. But I submit to you that God's call on your life does not need to involve something expansive. While it certainly could be that God calls you to something lifelong, I think God might also call you to a simple daily task. His call might even involve something that's not so specific. Maybe he wants you just to figure it out among several really interesting possibilities. Perhaps God has several things he'd like to see you do. I kind of think God's call involves anything you feel compelled to do that improves lives, yours included. I also think that God's call on your life very likely involves your own hopes, dreams, and passions. I submit to you that one way you can hear God's call on your life is to listen very carefully to what you are passionate about. That's because I think you are in your best position to serve others when you're doing something that you really love. I want to be very clear on how passion is defined, however. This is because I don't think our current use of this word fully encompasses its true meaning. Next slide, please. Here's the modern definition for passion: an intense emotion, a compelling enthusiasm or desire for something. Unfortunately, the modern definition of passion does not fully encapsulate what passion or calling is all about. I think passion is more fully understood when the modern definition is viewed alongside its root meaning. The word passion comes from the Latin pati, meaning enduring or suffering. You'll note, for example, that pati is found at the beginning of the word patience. By keeping in mind both the root and modern meanings of the word passion, we see that we are simultaneously enthusiastic and willing to suffer for our passions. With both meanings in mind, our understanding of this word becomes fuller and perhaps even more redemptive. I think it also gives us a proper understanding of what God's call on our lives might look like. Next slide, please. Thus, perhaps God's call in your life means find something good you're willing to suffer for and do just that. I'd like to tell you some stories of some people you might know. These people, in my opinion, heard God's call upon their life and passionately worked to bring that call to fruition. In telling the stories of these people, I'm hoping you might gain some insight into what the call of God on your life is. New slide, please. This is Robbie Bolton's story. In the summer of 2002, I was changing jobs and had about a month off. I didn't want to let a month pass by wherein I did nothing. So I solo hiked along the Green Mountains through the entire state of Vermont. 272 miles in 20 days with only what I could carry on my back. At night, I slept on the ground. Forcing myself to go solo was the hardest part of this journey. That's because I'm a people person. I often felt lonely and questioned why I was doing it. At one point, I got stuck in a cave and started crying. But it's been 13 years since I finished this hike, and I rank this accomplishment much higher than earning an advanced degree from one of the top programs in my field. After the birth of my children and my wedding day, this is one of the proudest achievements of my life. The hike took perseverance, discipline, and setting out for the day regardless of the weather or the circumstances. Next slide, please. That's a picture of Robbie at the end of the hike. Doing something like this instilled in me the confidence to complete tasks and strive for achievement. Just consistently, day after day, getting up, putting one foot in front of the other, and keep on moving forward. Now, Robbie had a month off to do whatever he wanted to do. Instead of catching up on his missed TV episodes, he went out and did something that instilled confidence within himself, and he's a better person as a result of that experience. Next slide, please. This is Chris Newhouse's story. I had a great experience at a small liberal arts school, so much so that I wished to become a professor at a small school. After finishing 4 years of a PhD program at MSU, I got a job teaching here at Spring Arbor. However, I hadn't yet earned my degree because I had to write my dissertation. My first Spring Arbor full-time salary was less than I made as an MSU teaching assistant, which was very discouraging. While beginning teaching at SAU, I still had to take grad classes and work on research. I also had to develop all new courses while I was teaching them. I had a toddler and a new baby. I continually fought a strong feeling that I could quit all this and get another job that would pay more while requiring less work. But I kept at it. Dr. Johnson was one of my biggest motivators during this process, constantly asking me how my degree was going. If it weren't for him and my wife believing in me and motivating me, I would have quit the PhD program and spent more time with my family. Even one of the professors at MSU told me I wouldn't be successful in getting my degree. 5 years after getting here, I finally finished that degree. 5 years of daily motivating myself to go back to work at both the degree and my job. 5 years of uncertainty, 12-hour work days, sleep deprivation, and discouragement. However, finishing my degree is what resulted in me still being at SAU today, and it was worth every minute of those 5 years. Newhouse has taught at Spring Arbor since 1981. New slide, please. This is Dr. Hauger's story. I already had 2 master's degrees in mathematics, but still felt compelled to finish my PhD. To do so, I had to cut back on my teaching load at Spring Arbor. I lost about 50 grand in income plus benefits as a result of having to cut back. The car I drove back and forth to MSU was a rattle trap, and some days I was worried if it was going to leave me stranded along US 127. And one day it actually did. There were days when I wondered if I would be able to do the work to complete my program. The program required more of me than I would have ever guessed. If I had known before I started the program how hard it would be, I might not have done it. But I'm glad I did. For one thing, it showed me that I could compete with the best. But more importantly, it provided me with opportunities I would otherwise never have been qualified to do. That's the advantage of advanced degrees. You never know where it's going to take you, but you can be sure it's going to take you places where you can make a difference. Hauger has taught at Spring Arbor since 1971. Next slide, please. Dr. Patton started pursuing a PhD at 40 years of age, much older than most graduate students. To do so, I'm going to read this as Paul now. To do so, I left my job as a successful pastor at a church. My wife, 3 daughters, and I moved to the East Coast, where I started taking graduate courses full-time. For almost 4 years, I was underemployed and financially frustrated. At several points in the journey, I nearly gave up. One day, while dropping my daughter off at school, I was particularly discouraged as I observed other fathers dropping their kids off at school, getting ready to head to their full-time jobs. How smug they looked dressed in their suits and work uniforms. It was my wife in particular who encouraged me to keep going. Fortunately, she had found a full-time job. I, on the other hand, was selling cappuccino machines and greeting cards. I took acting jobs here and there and was financially supported by family and friends. In the end, I was offered an opportunity to teach as an adjunct instructor at another university and hired full-time 1 year later. I think it's interesting how Dr. Patton's call changed from being a pastor to exploring how theater could be used in a pastoral sense. I think we all know how that worked out. Next slide, please. This is Jack Baker. That's him carrying some horse poop at a, I think that's a parade he's at or something like that. 12 or 13 years old there. You can tell when I read this that he's an English guy. When I was a young man, I spent my springs, summers, and falls working on a fruit farm. I was 13 and wanted to prove I could do a man's work. At a wage of $3.75 an hour, I should have known better. The work was from sunup to sundown, and it was the most physically taxing work I've ever done. I pulled cherry tarps as we shook endless orchards. My dad tells me almost all of those cherry trees are gone now. Sweet, sweet cherry irony. I spent entire weeks walking through newly plowed fields, picking up field stones, tossing them on a flatbed trailer under the unrelenting heat of the early summer sun. I began many mornings working until carving my way through jungles of sweet corn, filling lug after lug with ears of corn, becoming soaked to the bone from the morning dew until the noon sun began to beam down its infernal curses on us, now suffering in the sauna of our clothes. That's how you write right there. But the work paid off. I used one summer's wages to buy a mountain bike. It was a living symbol of the value of all that hard work I'd accomplished. The bike was eventually stolen from me. Someone may still be riding around on 250 hours of my farm labor wages. I hope they've crashed often and in front of others and to great personal discomfort. I'm being melodramatic, but maybe I'm not. The point is that the various jobs on that farm taught me long suffering, the good of communal work, and the virtue of perseverance, grit, stick-to-itiveness. When, and it's always when and not if, I came to face adversity in my academic studies, I would often reflect on those years on the farm. In fact, I do the same thing yet today. I remember vividly the sense of accomplishment I had despite the great self-doubt, grueling labor, and little pecuniary reward. Who uses pecuniary? And so I believe nearly all the work we do shapes us. If we do work well with perseverance and excellence, it will shape the work we do later. So the 15-page paper you have to write in the next 2 weeks can be your training ground. It can be your apple orchard. Will it be your burden or your boon? May the effort you put forth yield healthy fruit. Jack Baker shows us that just because a call is simple doesn't mean it'll be easy. Perhaps you want to do something you've never done before, to attempt to do something you aren't sure you can finish. You might also notice it could be argued that Dr. Baker thinks God is calling you to write that 15-page paper with excellence. Next slide, please. In the fall of 2007, I began the process of earning a PhD from MSU. In 2010, the money for my proposed project fell through. If I wanted to continue, I would have to wait another year to resume studies. Also, the project would require me leaving my wife and kids for a span of 6 months on 2 different occasions. I decided to change projects. 3 of my committee members, including my chair, dropped me as supervising my project. To give you an idea of what this is like, for those of you who don't know what graduate school is like, imagine finishing your junior year of college and having to start all over again. That's almost a perfect analogy. This sentence makes sense. I strongly considered ending my doctoral studies. Several faculty at MSU in my discipline verbally berated me for my decision to change programs, but I refused to quit. I ended up talking with 3 different members at MSU who agreed to serve on my committee on my new topic. Then in 2013, my dad, who was my best friend, passed away. This hit me pretty hard. Even so, I continued on. I was able to gut it out and finish my dissertation proposal and research, write up my findings, and just this past November 13th, I defended my dissertation. Sometimes we do not always know how things will work out. But as my dad used to say, we just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. We need to persevere because we know God has great things in store for us. What I find most compelling about Jeremy's story is his strong consideration of how following his call would affect his family. In a sense, he threw out 3 years of work in large part because he did not want to be away from his family in pursuit of his degree. Next slide, please. My dad had only an 8th grade education and worked his whole life in a factory in Detroit. My mom finished high school and worked her whole life as a custodian in a hospital. I obviously did not grow up in an academic environment. Mom and Dad fought most of their marriage and separated without divorcing because they couldn't afford it. Mom was an alcoholic. She had an ongoing affair and tried to commit suicide when the relationship with the other man ended. I didn't do well in school. I graduated in the bottom quarter of my class of over 500 students. I never read a whole book, nor wrote a term paper. I skipped as many classes as I could. I started doing drugs and drinking when I was 12. The only thing that sustained me then was that I was on the wrestling team in junior and senior high. I went on to Alpena Community College to study forestry, but flunked out the first semester. I deadened my pain with drugs, drinking, women, hunting, fishing, and camping. I became a Christian when I was 20. I got into Spring Arbor College on academic probation. My conversion gave me a hunger to know. I majored in philosophy and religion and minored in biology. I pulled off a 3.0 GPA with much hard work and help from professors and friends. I learned how to speak, write, and research. It was hard. I was always discouraged, but I persisted. I eventually went on to Asbury Theological Seminary and got a master's degree, graduating with a 3.3 GPA. Next, I went to Princeton, studied theology, 3.8. Afterwards, I got into a PhD program in theological and religious studies at Drew University. Graduated with honors, 3.9 GPA. My dissertation passed with highest distinction. I won a $40,000 scholarship to study in Germany under a world-class theologian. All that to say, I went from the bottom of the barrel academically to excelling at some of the world's best academic institutions. I owe it all to God, hard work, and help from family, friends, and great professors. Next slide, please. Sharon had a lifelong dream to get a doctorate. She can't really remember when she first envisioned this dream because she had it for so long. She started working towards a PhD in 1996. For the first year of studies, she took classes on MSU Tuesday and Thursday evenings because she was working full-time. To stay connected with her two daughters during this very busy time, she'd take one of her daughters with her to class on Tuesday and the other one on Thursday. This allowed them to talk in the car on the way to and from class. While she was in class, her daughters would sit at the back and do homework. When they finished, they'd just listen to the lectures. On more than one occasion, her high school daughters would answer some of the questions posed by the professor. She stopped after 1 year at MSU because she felt that her focus on graduate work was affecting her kids negatively. She resumed graduate work in 2009 and finished her PhD in 2013, 17 years after beginning her graduate work. What impresses me here again is how Sharon put her dreams on hold because her daughters needed her. I am also amazed by her tenacity. Next slide, please. If I may, I'd like to tell you my story. This is a picture of me at age 45 standing on the beach after finishing the 2.4-mile swim of a full Ironman competition. To complete an Ironman, you must swim 2.4 miles, bike 112, and then finish with a 26.2-mile run, all in less than 17 hours. At this point, I'm trying to get the painful cramping in my legs under control so I can walk to my bike to start the 112-mile bike ride. It was over 20 years prior to this moment that I first dreamed of finishing this event. Injuries and life got in the way, I couldn't do it. At this point, if I remember correctly, I'm more worried that I'm not going to finish than I am about the pain in my legs. The bike was a grind. My wife saw me get onto my bike and start the ride, and then she took my kids to the movies, and then she came back in time to see me finish the first lap of the 2-lap course. Just to give you an idea how long that is. My legs continued to cramp through the whole ride. The temperature climbed well into the 90s, and I felt progressively worse as the ride wore on. Miles 90 to 112 were murder, both physically and mentally. I continually thought about the 26.2 miles of running that lay ahead of me. I had run 3 marathons before, but not after a 2.4-mile swim and a 112-mile bike. During this time, I recalled how sore my legs were during each marathon I had run previously. During those last 22 miles on the bike, my legs hurt worse than they ever had during any portion of any of the other marathons I had run previously, and I hadn't taken a single step of the marathon. I finished the bike ride, headed into transition to change out of my biking gear and into my running gear. The temperature was still well into the 90s. My legs were stiff, too stiff to change into my running gear. Luckily, they allow people to help you change gear during Ironman events. Someone changed my socks and shoes for me. I knew I couldn't finish. There were 2 other athletes also changing into running shoes nearby. How in the world are we going to finish this? I asked aloud. I'm not, said one of them. One step at a time, said the other guy. I listened to that second guy. I stood up, I fought back the tears, and took the first few steps of the marathon. New slide, please. This is a picture of me as I took my first few steps of that marathon. If you look closely, you can see I'm fighting back tears. This is the face of someone who's afraid they aren't going to reach their dreams. I've seen that face in the look of some of my students that take my chemistry class. I'm certain that other SAU faculty members and coaches have seen this look on the faces of their students and their student athletes also. How in the world am I going to get this paper done? How am I going to break into the starting lineup? How am I going to get an A in this class? How am I going to pass this class? How are we ever going to compete with this team? How am I ever going to graduate? How are we going to move forward as a university? The first 2 miles of the marathon were nauseating, the toughest 2 miles I've ever run in my life. But by mile 2, I started feeling better, and from that point on, I knew I was going to finish the race. Night had fallen when I crossed the finish line over 14 hours after the start of the event. My wife, my 3 boys, and my dad, and Dr. Kono all ran across the finish line with me, although I skipped the finish line part. During the Ironman, and especially while training for this event, I strongly had the feeling I wasn't going to finish this lifelong dream. I think about this experience a lot as a teacher here at SAU. That's because I know many students don't think they can successfully finish my course or perhaps college. One step at a time, I think. One step at a time. New slide, please. For the final story, I'd like to share with you about one of my students who wasn't sure she could finish my class or college. I grew up poor and was picked on in school because I did not have the best clothes and my mother worked at McDonald's. I attended Jackson College after high school but had to quit because I had some sick family members. I needed to earn money for their care and also take care of them. I started to work in a factory driving a forklift truck. I did this for 11 years. In 2006, I got sick and tired of working in a factory, so I decided to go back to school. I wasn't sure how I was going to make it financially, and I was still taking care of ill family members. To make matters worse, I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. I needed to find some way to get away from them. My dream was, and still is, to become a physician's assistant. During my first semester at Baker College, I tried to commit suicide and almost died from drugs. Somehow I think that God knew I really needed him because I had a dream that changed my life. I dreamed I died and my niece was standing at my casket screaming for me to come back. When I woke up, I threw everything out and have not touched anything since that day. I worked so hard at getting good grades to not only prove to myself that I could do it, but to others who also only saw me as a drug addict and an alcoholic. 2 years later, I was still going to school when my mother died of cancer. I still had my grandmother and my dad to take care of, so I continued to work at the factory. In 2010, I finally graduated with honors with an associate's degree. I started my own massage business and still worked at the factory. In the fall of 2012, I started classes here at SAU. During the first semester, I decided to continue working second shift at the factory because I did not know if I could pass Dr. K's chemistry class. But I did with a B+. In January 2013, I quit factory work full-time to pursue full-time my dream of becoming a PA. So in spring of 2013, I took 15 credits, not realizing the magnitude of work. I earned a C+ in Chem 2, a C+ in Botany, an A in Anatomy and Physiology, and an A in Core 200. During the summer off, I went back to the factory to work to save on money and support myself to college. When people would complain about the work, I'd tell them to go to college. I graduated from SAU 2 weeks ago with my biology degree. Dr. K asked me if I never get into PA school and had to go back to the factory, was getting a degree worth my time. Yes, it was worth my time because I proved to myself I could do it. Also, it was the satisfaction of knowing I was smart enough to complete the degree that was worth the while. I had a blast at SAU because even on my worst day in biochem, nothing could compare to my worst day in a factory. Knowing I could turn my life around and that I had what it took to make it and to make my mother proud and my grandmother proud of me is priceless. And there are people who say that going to college is only about getting a job. They don't get it. Next slide, please. In closing, I'd like to say if you find something good for which you are willing to suffer, strongly consider that you have heard the call of God upon your life. If you can't find such a thing, then at least do the little things with gusto. If neither of these things excite you, then set out to do something you aren't certain you can finish. Alternatively, try again to complete something that you have thus far been unable to finish. And if you don't want to do any of this, at least catch up on your missed TV episodes.